Okay, before we get started, I want to welcome Reverend John Wolf from Birmingham United Methodist Church to lead us in our invocation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, fellow councilmen, staff, honored guests, fellow stakeholders. I think that's most of us. Before I offer a brief prayer, I just want to ask us to think about the folks in Syria tonight. A couple of days ago, I was watching the news, and I saw all the chaos and trauma that's happening there, and I thought, you know, these folks are fighting for freedom, and just a few generations ago, it was us. And to think about that and where we are here tonight, where we can come free and deliberate on issues that has to do with this 23,000 acres of beautiful countryside, that it's amazing when people pay the price for the right thing, what can happen. So let's pray just a minute. Lord, on this night we ask you, as God of all things and all creation, to be present with us. Remind us of the incredible freedom that we have in this country, in this community, and the responsibility to share together in things that matter most. We think of those folks tonight in Argentina, the terrible train wreck, folks of course, in Syria, and even Afghanistan as the war is kind of breaking out again. And here we are on this tiny planet, and a little speck of dust right here, and we can call upon you to be present. You are the God of all creation. So tonight, for the council members and all who have matters of deliberation and decision, we pray for wisdom that might come from you. Be present with us now. We pray in the name of the one who created us like himself. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Reverend Wolf. Okay, I'd like to call the regular meeting of the Milton City Council for Wednesday, February 22nd to order, 2012 to order. Will the city clerk please call the roll and make general announcements?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'll be happy to call roll for the February 22nd, 2012 regular meeting. However, I would like to remind those in attendance to please silence all cell phones at this time. Additionally, those attending the meeting who would like to provide public comment, either during the public hearing or during the call for public comment, you're required to complete a public comment card prior to speaking on an item. There is no public comment for consent agenda or items under first presentation. Those called to speak will be taken in the order that the speaker cards were received by the city clerk staff prior to the beginning of tonight's meeting. All speakers will identify themselves by name, address, and organization, if applicable. The City Council may allow public comment on either an agenda item or general public comment from a representative of such an organized group or association, provided, however, that such an individual shall file a notarized affidavit that they have the authority to speak on behalf of said organization on a form provided by the city clerk prior to the agenda item being called. Demonstration of any sort within this chamber is prohibited, so please refrain from any applause, cheering, booing, outbursts, or dialogue with any person speaking. Please show the same respect to the person speaking that you will expect to receive yourself. Anyone in violation will be asked to leave. As I call roll, please confirm your attendance. Mayor Joe Lockwood.
Here.
Councilmember Karen Thurman.
Here.
Councilmember Matt Coombs.
Here.
Councilmember Bill Lusk.
Here.
Councilmember Bert Hewitt is absent tonight, out of town. Councilmember Joe Longoria.
Here.
Councilmember Lance Dwyer.
Here.
Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I want to welcome everybody here tonight. I see we may have a couple of students here just because they wanted to be here, right? So anyways, thanks for being here. And we'll start out with the city clerk to call the next item.
Our next item is approval of meeting agenda. Agenda item number 12043.
Okay, approval of the meeting agenda. Is there any items to be considered? Okay, do I have a motion and a second on the agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the meeting agenda as prepared by staff.
Second. Okay, got a motion by Councilmember Luss, second by Councilmember Coates. Any discussion on the agenda? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Next item is public comment. Public comment is a time for citizens to share information with the mayor and city council and to provide input and opinions on any matter that is not scheduled for its own public hearing during today's meeting. There's no discussion on items on the consent agenda or first presentation from the public or from council. Each citizen who chooses to participate in public comment must complete a comment card and submit it to the city clerk. Please remember this is not a time to engage the mayor or members of the city council in conversation. When your name is called, please come forward and speak into the microphone stating your name and address for the record. You'll have 5 minutes for remarks. Do we have any general public comment?
We do, sir. We have one, Mr. Scott Stukowski.
Yeah, that's good.
Good evening. Yeah,
Scott.
just Scott is plenty fine for me. Mayor, council, staff, I'm Scott Stahusky, reside at 3154 Chippingwood Court. Today here is in front of you as president of the Hopewell Youth Association again. I'm not going to be able to stick around for the whole meeting since my team's going to take advantage of the nice weather outside and have baseball practice tonight. But you have an item on your agenda later this evening that I want to rise in support of. And on behalf of the over 1,000 kids that play baseball at the Hopewell Youth Association, I want to say thank you. I know you probably don't hear it enough. It's too easy to hear the phone calls about what's wrong in the city, what's not working, but clearly there are some things that are going on and progress is being made for parks and recreation in this town. We're in full support, as you'd imagine, of the purchase of the adjacent land to Bell Memorial Park, and we look forward to working with you and staff as you make plans to develop that. Over the last 8 years, Hopewell has put almost $300,000 of our own money into that park. Well before the city of Milton was here. That began in 2004 with the purchase of the Bennett House. And we put some money into that deal, and we've made a number of improvements together with the city as well as some of our own improvements. And we're looking forward to this significant improvement that will really dramatically enhance recreation programs for the city of Milton. So thank you for your consideration of that offer.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I should also, before I forget, I recognize 2 board members who could join me tonight. Ask them to rise real quick. Ken Sisson is with me, and Joe Kozak, and 2 of my most active board members who work closely with all of us, and the other 15 people who drive Hopewell's baseball program. So thanks again.
Thank you very much. Okay, do we have any other public comment?
That's all, sir.
Okay, let's move on to the consent agenda. Will you, the city clerk, please sound those items?
First item is approval of the February 6, 2012 regular minutes. Agenda item number 12044. Next, approval of a professional services agreement between the City of Milton and Tennell Spangler and Associates, Inc. for the purpose of providing professional planning services for the creation of historic preservation design guidelines. Agenda item number 12045. Our third item is approval of a purchase agreement between the City of Milton and Hardy Ford for the purchase of 8 Ford New Generation Police Interceptors, NGPI. Agenda item number 12046. Our fourth and final consent agenda item tonight is approval of a professional services agreement between the City of Milton and Dewberry and Davis, LLC, to provide citywide future floodplain mapping services. Agenda item number 12047.
Okay, do I have a motion and a second on this consent agenda?
Mayor, I move that we approve the consent agenda as submitted.
I'll second it.
Okay, got a motion by Councilmember Large, second by Councilmember Thurman. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Okay, we don't have any reports and presentations, so I want to move on to the first presentation. Will the city clerk please call first presentation?
Our item is approval of an ordinance restating the City of Milton's defined benefits pension plan. This is agenda item number 12048.
Okay. Do I have a motion and a second?
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the reading of first presentation, the approval of an ordinance restating the City of Milton's defined benefits pension plan, agenda item number 12048.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilmember Luss, second by Councilmember Longoria. Approve the first presentation item. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. We don't have any items under our public hearings, so we'll move on to our zoning agenda. Will the city clerk please read the zoning rules and sound the first item?
At the second regularly scheduled meeting of the month, the mayor and city council consider a zoning agenda. These items include rezoning petitions, modifications of zoning, use permits, and associated concurrent variances, in addition to ordinances, resolutions, and text amendments. The petitions will be heard in the sequence listed on the posted agenda. I would like to acquaint you with some of the rules and procedures for this meeting tonight. The applicant and all those speaking in support of an application will be allowed a total of 10 minutes to present the petition. The applicant may choose to save some of the time for rebuttal following the presentation by the opposition. Since the burden of proof is upon the applicant will be allowed to make closing remarks provided time remains with the allotted time. The city clerk's staff will be keeping track of time and will inform you periodically of the remaining time for your presentation. Those called to speak will be taken in the order that the speaker cards were received by the city clerk's staff prior to the beginning of tonight's meeting. All speakers will identify themselves by name, address, and organization, if applicable, before beginning their presentation. The Planning Commission heard the rezoning agenda items and recommendations have been forwarded to the mayor and the city council for consideration and disposition. In addition, the applicant shall not submit material to the council during this meeting unless requested to do so. All material that you wish to be reviewed by the council in consideration of your application should be submitted to the staff of the Department of Community Development to be included in the normal distribution of packages to the council. When an opponent of a rezoning action has made within 2 years immediately preceding the filing of the rezoning action being opposed, campaign contributions aggregating $250 or more to a local government official of the local government which will consider the application, it shall be the duty of the opponent to file a disclosure with the governing authority of the respected local government at least 5 days prior to the Planning Commission meeting. A violation of relevant state statute constitutes a misdemeanor. Therefore, if you have contributed $250 or more to a council member and have not filed a disclosure prior to the Planning Commission meeting, the city attorney strongly suggests that you have someone else speak for your point of view. Our first zoning item tonight is RZ 1201, to amend Article 6, Division 2, AG 1, Agricultural District, as it relates to allowing structures housing animals within the front yard and fencing along public right-of-ways. This is agenda item number 12033. First presentation was at our February 6, 2012 council meeting. This was discussed at February 13, 2012 work session. Ms. Kathy Field.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. As the City Clerk said, we discussed this item at the February 3rd work session, and at that time there were 2 items that came up that we have incorporated into the working document that you have before you, and that is that we changed the words domesticated animals to livestock. And again, that was a discussion item and certainly something that you can review and concur with tonight. And then secondly, there was a discussion about fence colors in the section dealing with fences. And so we did add some fence colors, and we suggest black, white, or dark brown. And again, that is in there for your discussion and review tonight. We will be working off of the Planning Commission's recommendations with the City Attorney's comments, which are attached to the memo. And the gray represents the City Attorney's comments, and the yellow was the original comments by the by the Planning Commission. I'm sorry. In addition, I gave you sort of a working summary so that you could discern the difference between the current zoning regulations and the Planning Commission recommendations. And I gave you a breakdown, including barns in the front, the way it currently reads now by the Planning Commission, horse barns only in the front. And then uncovered riding areas, then uncovered riding areas with lighting or bleachers, and then the same with covered riding areas. Covered riding areas just without anything, and then covered riding areas with lighting and or bleachers. And so you can see by these bullet points essentially what is contained in the Planning Commission's recommendations. And so the thought is to work from the Planning Commission's recommendations with your comments and any changes or wherever you want to go.
Okay. Do we have any public comment on this?
We do have one, sir, in support,
Okay. If,
and that's Miss Laura Bentley.
all right, thank you.
Thank you. Laura Bentley, 2500 Bethany Church Road. I spoke at the work session, so this is a continuation of my support on behalf of the Milton Horse Council for this amendment. Certainly, we understand we can't discriminate against other animals besides horses, so that's fine. The arenas in the front, in front of houses, on large parcels, I think we're all in favor of. The only concern that I would bring forward at this point would be parcels that are perhaps 10 acres or less with the covered riding arenas. You know, I think I mentioned at the last meeting that these structures aren't necessarily always new. They can be moved, so that would be a concern. I also just think of it in terms of, I have a 10-acre horse farm, and so I thought, you know, what that might be like if I put a covered riding arena in the front of my property where I am very close to neighborhoods on each side. I think it would really change the complexion of, you know, my area, and I think you might have the potential to affect negatively more people than positively. So I just would ask you to consider that on the smaller parcels, that perhaps you might want to consider that to be a situation where you would have a hardship, so that it would come forward, neighbors would know, and it could be, you know, accommodated, but, you know, perhaps neighbors need to know about that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you have any other public comment?
No, sir, we do not.
Okay, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing then, and we'll open it back up for council for questions and discussion. Kathy, if you'd like, do you want to, should we go with, and just kind of go off your summary and
Yes,
go
certainly.
item by item? And
Yes, and
we'll start
one other
discussing.
piece of information which was emailed to you, and I believe it was the request of Councilwoman Thurman, was in regard to, are there any current size limitations on anything? And we did find that for non-institutional buildings, on a development of 4 acres or less, the maximum building size shall be 20,000 square feet. Let's see, if two or more buildings are built, the total size of all buildings shall be a maximum of 25,000 square feet, no single one of which shall exceed 15,000. So you can do 20,000 on 4 acres or less, and then over that, over 4 acres, the maximum size shall be 25,000 square feet. So if it's one building under 4 acres, 20,000. If it's more than one building under 20 acres, a max of 25,000. And then on developments larger than 4 acres, the max shall be 25,000 square feet. So that was a piece of information that Councilwoman Thurman asked for. So back to the cheat sheet here, so to speak, in terms of the bullet points. And again, as I said, we've divided these into various structures. So the first structure we talk about is, and again, under the Planning Commission recommendation, they suggested horses only for barns in the front, and that it be allowed for residential, in residential uses, and that in non-residential uses, with a minimum of 10 acres, that it be allowed.
Okay.
I've got
Okay.
just one question. When we discussed this in work session, we actually had current zoning, planning commissions, and then planning staff's recommendations. And it looks like now we just have the current zoning and the planning commission recommendations. Are you going to give us staff's recommendations as we go through each category?
I could. I think that the thought was just to use one as the working document to work off of. And so that's why we chose the planning condition one. But certainly, if you'd like me to do that, I can certainly do that. And Robin, if you can.
Yeah, I would like to hear what staff recommends in addition on each of these categories, especially since it's no longer included in our information.
I think I can just do it verbally. Would that work? So the only difference in the horses is that, well, we number one recommended that it be animal barns as opposed to horse barns. and that we also allowed for barns in residential areas, or for residential use. But in terms of non-residential, our difference was that we had no minimum acreage, whereas the Planning Commission recommended a minimum of 10 acres. So that's the only difference.
So I guess we could start with the point, horses versus livestock
Correct.
or all animals. Is, you know, the council have a discussion on that, of basically have been sort of discriminated against other animals, but I think staff's recommendations, and I would say mine would be too, to you know, livestock or you know, a different term than horses only. Any comments on that?
I mean, I agree. I mean, I could see why it would be primarily horses, but at the same time, if you have a goat or
Cows
something
or-
else that's friends with the horse and wants to come in the barn, I'd hate to tell it it couldn't.
Right. That's what I heard last in the work session, but there were
Yeah.
associated animals that went along with the stabling of horses.
Yeah, so if staff could
To
kind
allow
of
that.
make notes of that, so when we get to
Yes, so we're,
to-
Robin
Okay,
with Ken's
all right.
help are going to keep notes of all your comments.
And I
Okay.
guess the other part of this to discuss is whether or not we really think it needs a 10-acre minimum, because staff did not have a 10-acre minimum.
Correct. We just allowed it by right.
well,
Right.
let me ask kind of a theoretical question. We're talking about barns in front of a home or a structure, or a home. Obviously, on the residential, that's an issue, but on non-residential, maybe a piece of property doesn't have any structures on there. So is it even a moot point? You know, if it's a non-residential, unless, you know, there's a house on it and it's considered a non-residential use. I guess we can keep it on there, but I'm just.
I mean, if it
may
has
not
a
be an
house on
issue
it, does it automatically go to
to
a residential
Yes.
use?
Yeah,
Or-
that's my
Yes,
point.
that's
Or
the
is it-
distinction. If you live on that lot, it's residential. If you're not living on it and you're using it as just the lot next door, or it's a commercial use to it, then we put that in the non-residential.
Okay.
But if it has a house on it that you're not living in, does it go in the non-residential or the residential?
That's a Ken question.
That's a great question.
Because if somebody buys a 10-acre lot, and it may be next door to the house, that, you know, they buy the house and the lot next door to them, but they're not going to ever live in that one. They buy it primarily for the pasture. What bucket does it go in?
Well, I think it depends, as with any other, a lot of times in the law, it's what is the primary purpose of the property. And if the primary purpose of the property is the best we can devise is not for residential purpose, but for an agricultural, a true bona fide agricultural purpose, I think that planning staff have the ability to make that call. It's a fact question, and it's a tough one. But the best we could do would be based upon the information provided by the property owner as to what the intention is to use the property for.
You know, I'm in favor, and I'll use a couple examples of not having the minimum 10 acres required on a non-residential, because you may have a situation where, as Councilman Thurman said, you may have someone has a home and a property, and they buy 1 acre, 2 acre property beside them that's vacant. If they may buy that and just put a small barn on there and keep 1 or 2 horses or some kind of livestock, which I think is the intention that the city would like to see. But if they can't do that, then the only use for that property is for somebody to build a home on it.
Right.
So I would be against having a 10-acre minimum on a non-residential use just because of that. Someone may buy a 4-acre site or a 5-acre site, instead of developing it into, you know, a few homes, they may put a barn on there and pasture some horses or whatever, which, again, I think the intent for Milton, you know, would be nice, so, or has. So, you know, that's my, you know, and I'd like to hear what everybody else thinks, but if, you know, and I don't know what the minimum is. I mean, you know, 1 acre, they could probably, you know, put a small barn and one horse on, 2 acres, a couple, kind of rule of thumb, but.
And Mr. Mayor, your hypothetical raises the exact point I was trying to articulate, and that is what someone's purpose for a piece of property can change. They very well may purchase the property with an intention, a specific intention to do one thing with it, and that may not work. And they have to change their.
Does anybody have any comments on that as to whether we took the minimum off?
Yeah, so I understand the idea behind the minimum, because, you know, you don't want to overdo a piece of property and have it primarily be the barn or the, you know, the stable or whatever. So the real question is, what is the minimum? So like you said, Mayor, you know, if it's not 10 acres, what is it? I mean, the way things go with ordinances, they're, you know, it's black and white. If it's 9.9 acres, okay, sorry, you can't have a barn on it. So I think we could be a little bit more flexible on the minimum, but I don't know what that number should be.
You still have certain setbacks, don't you?
Yes, we still have a 100-foot setback, and then there's a 150-foot required setback from a residential occupied unit building. So even if it's not on your own land, you still have to be 150 feet away. So that's what's inherent in the ordinance.
Joe?
Liz?
So I was understanding when you were talking about non-residential uses for maximum building size, you were talking about under 4 acres or less?
Yes, right now we
Allow up to 25,000 square feet
20,000 in
20.
one building, 25 in two buildings.
in 2 buildings, okay?
And then over 4 acres, there's a maximum of 25.
25,000.
Right.
So there is some sort of regulation right now as how much you actually could put on a piece of property, although, again, 4 acres down to, 1 acre, that could be a big difference in terms of putting a 20,000 square foot building, single 20,000 square foot, or 2 buildings that are 25,000 total.
Right.
I'll bring up the same point again. Is there a way, as part of this ordinance, that we don't establish a minimum acreage, but you establish, as you do in a lot of zones, a floor area ratio that's allowable based on the acreage of the property? So you can only establish, if you have 2 acres, which is 90,000, say, in round numbers, square feet, and you could have 20% of that could be floor area for a barn. That would be a way to kind of at least control.
Well, I think the
that.
setbacks do control it, because when I used to live in Crabapple, we had 3.82 acres, and you could not put a barn on the property unless it was because of the way the lot was shaped, unless it was a 5-foot wide barn, which really wouldn't do you a whole lot of good, but just because of the setbacks. So, I mean, that was even on, almost 4 acres.
Depending on the shape of the
Depending on the
property.
shape of the
I mean, if
property.
it were a square piece of property, then
Yeah, but you
you
still
probably
would be.
put it much. I mean, you'd still be
A
prepped.
2-acre square piece of property, you wouldn't be able to put anything very large on it within the 100 and be 150 feet away from all sides.
Right.
Well, I think you got to also look at, and I don't know the answer as to who controls this, but, a responsible livestock owner or horse owner is not going to, if you only had a small parcel, you can't put too many animals on it.
Right.
And again, I'm just, thinking through, and 1 acre may be, if I suggest 1 acre, may be too small. But, I'm looking at a situation where somebody lives on an acre lot and they've got a horse and they board it somewhere else and they'd like to buy the acre next door to them rather than have a house built there, put a small barn and keep their horse there. If we can, with setbacks and all that, if that can control so that you don't have a huge
Yeah.
building on there
Right.
or it's over, or maybe it needs to be 2 acres or 3. But I'm just trying to look out for, some of the mini farm or small farm, or somebody that wants to just add some natural land around their house that could use it for that. So, Bill?
Karen and Lance brought up the point that I've been mulling over here too. It's a configuration of the property. You could have 10 acres out there that's 200 feet wide and half a mile long. Or you could have a gore-shaped piece of property too, which would be restrictive because of your side sets and setbacks. Could be physical features out there too, floodplain. creeks, something like that. So I'm still kicking this around in my mind of how to address it. But,
May I make a suggestion? Currently, and also the Planning Commission and the current regulations both speak to a minimum of 10 acres, which I think is easy enough. We can all visualize that. Would you be amenable to anything less than 10 acres requiring a use permit? So then it gets a case-by-case basis. So if you end up with these odd-shaped pieces of property or something, at least there's an avenue for people to come through to get that. I mean,
I think that's how you address something like that.
I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with, would you consider maybe dropping it, say, to 5 acres, and then anything under 5 acres had to have a special use
What
permit or
is it?
whatever, and that, because
What
5
is it?
acres is a pretty good-sized piece of property that someone could,
Yeah, because I mean, in order to get the conservation property tax break, it's, I think, 6 acres, is that? Is it 8 acres? Okay. Yeah, so I don't think you definitely don't need to be any greater than that. Hate to be able to qualify for conservation property tax, but not be able to put a horse on your property.
so I'll just throw that out. I don't know if you could
Sounds
5 acres, but then have to go through anything below that, or anything below that you'd have to bring.
yeah, you'd have to bring it for a case-by-case
Case by-
review, and it would go to the DRB, then it would come to the city council for your review. So that
fine
might
with
be a
that.
way of dealing with those
Okay,
obstacles.
is everybody
sounds
good with that?
reasonable.
All right, Robin, are you taking notes? 5 acres?
5 acres or less than 5 go before
So
use permit.
structures and, structures housing livestock, which may be located in the rear side yards, provided the structure must be located at least 100 feet from all property lines and at least 150 feet from any occupied structure located on any other property, and a minimum of 5 acres.
And anything less than 5
Less
acres
than five,
would
a use
require a
permit.
use
Anything
permit.
under 5 acres requires a use permit.
And that's just for the non-residential.
And that's on the non-residential, so that wouldn't be on the rear side of the property. It could be anywhere. Okay?
Okay? So I-
And not, not to be redundant, but the other shoe that needs to drop is that greater than 5 acres, it's going to be permitted as of right. Less than 5 acres, special use permit.
But they'd still have to adhere to the setbacks
To
and
the
whatnot.
setback,
so
yes,
that-
yes, yes.
Okay, shall I
All right.
proceed? We're now moving on to uncovered riding areas in the front. And the Planning Commission, in terms of residential, they recommended that it be allowed, and the staff also recommended it be allowed. In terms of non-residential, it's really the same discussion we just had, in that the Planning Commission recommended that it be allowed, but with a minimum of 10 acres, and the staff recommended that it be allowed with no minimum acreage.
That's something, again, that, in fact, could we have a brief discussion on what people perceive as a riding area? I know everybody has something different. I'm perceiving that as it could be a corral type, fenced-in riding area, an oval shape, or, someone may just have some area in the front that they ride in, real casual. So is that what staff,
Do we have a definition in there?
what's the definition of that?
No.
Does everybody on that page, though, they picture a riding area being a ring?
I figured,
fenced-in
I
ring?
pictured it being a fenced-in area
Yeah.
that's specific to riding, not just a pasture that you could go ride in.
Right.
Okay. Would it be, I know staff's recommending 0, the planning commission 10 acres. Would it be reasonable to go back to the same 5 acre, anything under 5 acres has to come before us for special use? It's allowed anything over 5 acres? Is there a problem with that?
It's whatever you.
No, I'm just asking, does anybody have a,
I like that.
Robin, you're right.
There's no riding areas defined.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I
We-
was
we
looking at
moved
the
on.
last
We're-
question.
That provides a nice symmetry in your code, quite frankly, that you're
Yeah.
using some of the, yeah. a lot of it.
It'll be the same thing we just agreed to before.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
Less
5
than
acre.
5 cup.
Less than 5.
For the riding
Mayor.
areas.
Lance?
Yeah, just visually, just to give you a perspective in your mind, 5 acres is about 470 feet square. It's a 5 acre parcel. land, so that kind of gives you an idea
And,
how much 5 acres is. We're square now, of course, you've got configuration and such.
Now, I'm going to say a typical riding, you know, a riding area, and tell me if I'm wrong, Laura, but somewhere 180 by 60 feet wide, something like that, 75. But, you know, again, you have a smaller piece of property, and they have a smaller
Right.
riding area. They'd have the setbacks and
Right.
all that. Okay?
Okay, I'm moving on now. We're getting into a little more intense use here. This is an uncovered riding area, but with lighting and/or bleachers.
Can I say something too, because I know we discussed this earlier. It sounds natural to include lighting and bleachers together, but really a lighted, you know what, I'm wrong, we're on uncovered. So, okay, lighting is a big issue on uncovered. Okay.
Okay, so with either lighting and/or bleachers. So the Planning Commission's recommendations were that for, in a residential use area, to prohibit them, and for non-residential, even with a minimum of 10 acres, to also prohibit them. And the staff suggested that in the residential area, that they be allowed with a use permit, and that in the non-residential with no minimum acreage, this also would be allowed with a use permit. So we controlled everything with the use permit, and the Planning Commission prohibited both.
Anybody have any comments, Matt?
I like the idea of the use permit as well, you know, and just because we want to give someone an avenue to bring their case before us, just to say no for the brush with broad stroke may not necessarily be the best way to go. In my mind, I just see others, if we're going to try to increase the demand for equestrian housing, and someone may come up with that idea, you know, we don't want them to automatically think they can't come to Milton if that idea doesn't work. It's just my thought.
Okay, so you thinking on residential, instead of prohibiting them, allow with a use?
Yeah, some sort of
use permit.
avenue that makes it at least a discussion. You know, at least bring neighbors out here and we can have an idea of whether or not it makes sense.
Yeah, I think the thing that, and what I was going to get into between covered and uncovered, the lighting part could be a major issue with an uncovered riding ring. It could be stadium lights and, you know, certainly mess with the neighbors and all that. Versus a covered riding ring with lighting may just be a little bit of light inside that just illuminates the area inside and doesn't shine out. So I can see the Planning Commission's point with prohibiting them just because of the, you know, what it could entail, a commercial type operation with bleachers and big lights and all, but I'm certainly open to, you know, if the council wants to have some kind of an avenue where, on a case by case, you could look at it.
Going through a use permit process, you could require an applicant to present a photometric plan as part of your facility, just like you would do for a commercial piece, to show what the foot candles are at the property line, to see what the spillover is, because lighting can be designed
Right, that's
to limit that.
exactly right, yes.
So going through a use permit would allow that process and to look at those types of effects on the adjacent property and right-of-ways as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I like the use permit because in essence, you know, you can consider it prohibited unless there's special circumstances that would, you know, make the way the ordinance reads not apply. So I don't have a problem with that.
I like the use permit too, because I think if you don't have the use permit in here, their only alternative is to try to get a variance, which would require a hardship. So, and there are times that it might really be in the best interest of the community, and it might be perfectly appropriate to allow it, but yet it's not a hardship. So I like the use permit, because then it does give you a little bit more discretion as far as whether or not we really feel like it's what's best, rather than just having to have a hardship for it.
Anybody else?
I'll go along with that. I guess what comes to mind is, you know, how many of these cases could you anticipate coming up in the future? I know Planning Commission's put a lot of work into this, and of course staff has, and our attorney has too. I'm not into beating a dead horse, but you know, I wonder if we're just overworking this whole thing. I understand the need for controls and constraints and restrictions on all this, but use permits seem to be the easiest and probably most universal way to handle a lot of these cases.
Okay. So what we're talking about is possibly having them allowed in residential area, but with a use permit.
I'd probably have them allowed in a residential or a non-residential, but requiring a use permit, and you could, minimum use permit, period. So regardless of what size acreage it was, it just requiring a use permit for it.
Well, I think we certainly would, if we're going with lighting and bleachers, we need to at least mimic and be the same or more land for than the unlighted.
For the unlighted, though, we said use permit for less than
5 acres.
5 acres. So
So-
here, to me, I would just say use permit regardless of the acreage because of the lighting, that we want to make sure that we look at each of them on a case-by-case basis.
Just a question real quick. This is basically the third situation where we're talking about plugging in a special use permit process to allow something to be done on a small piece of property. Does the council have a vision that there would be any identifiable criteria that would guide your granting of the special use permit? In other words, and this may be something community development staff could just answer for me. I mean, are there some just generic, whether in the discretion of the city council, the granting of the special use permit would be deemed in the best interest of the applicant, something like that? Because if in the absence of any criteria whatsoever, it does make a hard burden for the council to deny one. If there's nothing by which, you see what I'm saying? If you have no criteria by which to apply to it, and you simply say, come in and get a permit, and the applicant fills all their applications out correctly and comes and applies and gets before you, and you say, we're going to deny you, and the answer is going to be why? What was the criteria that you denied the special use permit? I just, and it may just be me not being able to hone in on the correct language in the Milton zoning code, and maybe the community development staff could guide me there, but I don't want us to leave it open such that you put in a permit that is not giving you any more latitude than I know you're looking for. Because what I know you're looking for is to maybe be able to fashion maybe some conditions with respect to it, maybe the light candles and how many foot candles can come off the lighting, and making sure you don't adversely impact adjacent property owners because of the small size of the lot. I get all that. I just wonder what your vision is as far as maybe seeing some of those criteria in the actual code.
I think where I have the heartburn with all of this, I think, is with the lighting aspect of it. And, Lance brought up a good point of doing photogrammetric studies or analysis of this. I think of all of the things that are probably objectionable is the lighting aspect of facilities like this, and the impact. It impacts everybody around 360 degrees from a property. I think if we were to grant a special use permit and have some guidelines to address this, I agree with your point. I think it needs
And
to have...
I can respond to that, too, that based on the vote tonight, should you desire to use the special use permit as a tool to grant these, that we would come up with the criteria that would be necessary for you to base your special use permit on. But we really needed to see where you were going tonight to see if indeed that special use permit was an avenue that you were going to take.
That's fair.
But we're prepared to develop those for your review.
Karen?
I mean, I would think that it would be very similar to what the criteria is to grant a variance in a lot of jurisdictions, because a lot of them don't require you to have a hardship. A lot of them just have to say it's the intent of the, in the best interest of the community, and it's not detrimental to the adjacent property. And that would be what I think we would need to have in there, something so that it wasn't a blanket granting of it where it was not appropriate, but it did allow us to do it where it is appropriate. And my thought was, I mean, there is a very nice barn on New Providence Road that's covered riding area. It is not far off from the road. If they want to put a house, and I believe they do have a house back behind there, it would be appropriate in that particular area. And under these situations here, it's automatically going to be denied because there's really no way you could ever have a hardship for it. Even if you had 50 or 60 acres, you still wouldn't have a hardship. So,
But I see Ken's point too, but what Kathy's saying is if we elect to choose a path, then staff can bring back to us
Right.
some stipulations or
And that
criteria.
spot on answered my concern.
Okay. But I agree with Bill too, that, the big thing that I think what gives everybody a little heartburn is the lighting part. So it would have to be addressed with, and I'd certainly be in favor of maybe putting a minimum acreage, maybe it's 5 or whatever, for a lighted one, and then they'd still have to come to as a special use permit, so we could, check out all the lighting and make sure they fit the criteria, rather than, so go up, ratchet it up a little bit for a lighted, uncovered.
well, I would think for lighted, though, it shouldn't be a whole lot different than lighted tennis courts are, as far as, the impact on the surrounding area. So I think you even have to have a greater setbacks for the riding thing. So I think we need to look at it along those same criteria. Or is it any different from a lighted tennis courts?
Joe?
Yeah, and I think we have, there's some kind of a lighting ordinance. I don't know if it's specific to overlays, but I've read plenty of times what the criteria are for lights that are allowed versus lights that aren't allowed. So I'm sure that we do have some coverage there. I think the challenge here, Ken, to sort of answer your question again is, we're sitting up here trying to think of the infinite number of possibilities that are going to come before us, and the reality is there's really only a finite number because Milton's already laid down properties, already defined and things like that. But we're trying to just cover the issue related to, it's obvious that the homeowner or the landowner should be able to do this, yet the way our ordinances read, they just have no avenue to come back. I like what Councilwoman Thurman said in terms of, the guidelines that we could set up to that. I don't know if they're specific enough. I don't know if those are still a little loose, but certainly working off of that would be a good idea.
Concur. I think Councilman Thurman's point was a good one, and I think that when you're into the area of the unknown, you don't have any idea right now the sorts of applications you might receive. You want to leave yourself a little bit of room that might look a little like some variance criteria. Maybe take out the hardship, but certainly the intent of the code, that sort of language is always nice.
Yeah.
Okay, do you have any suggestions on this one,
In
based on
terms-
this conversation?
Well, I think where we are is with the non-residential in terms of whether or not there should be a minimum acreage or not. And do you want to preclude anyone with lighting or bleachers from 5 acres or less and just allow it after that with a special use permit? Or, to speak to Councilwoman Thurman, she suggested just a blanket special use permit. So I think that's where we are. Do you want to have a minimum acreage with a special use permit, or just throw it open with a special use permit?
Again, and I understand Councilwoman Thurman's with the tennis court analogy. The only difference is it's probably going to be much bigger, so it's going to have more lights. I still would feel comfortable having some kind of minimum acreage, whether it's 5 or whatever, and then a use permit after that. But
So
again,
you're saying it's allowed above a certain acreage, and
it's not allowed under a certain acreage. Over a certain acreage, it's
Yeah.
allowed with a use permit.
Okay.
But
I agree. I mean, if we're going to have 5 acres for any kind of a riding covered area that I'm thinking of in my mind, which I've seen can be pretty big, and sometimes may not be enough acreage for what I'm thinking would need that kind of lighting. So I'm okay with establishing a minimum. I'm not sure if 5 is the right minimum, but we need to definitely look at that.
And this is for both residential and non-residential uses?
I think we're prohibited
You just prohibited
in residential,
period?
correct? Is that where we
No,
were?
in residential, where we are now is that it's allowed with no acreage requirements
Right.
with a use permit.
Right.
Use permit.
So if you were residential, you could get it, so if we're applying an acreage requirement, you seem to me you'd have to apply it to
On the
both
residential.
residential and non-residential. Because
Realistically, you said 4 acres square was about 475 by 475?
Did I say 4 acres? Yeah.
And so realistically, if you had to be 200 feet from all property lines, that would only leave you about a 75 by 75 foot riding arena
Not
on
big.
4 acres.
Right.
So realistically, you're gonna have to be bigger than 4 acres for it to work anyway, or else
Even
it's
if
gonna be a
it's
very small
perfect
riding
square.
arena.
Yeah, or perfect.
Even if it's a perfect square.
Yeah. Well, 4 acres is only 417 actually square.
Oh, it's gonna be a real small riding arena, 17 by 17.
Well,
By 400.
we could go back and put the same, have both, if it's 5 acre minimum, which I think we all agree that's gonna be pretty tight anyways. And over that, 5 acres and over, you can special use permit, 5 acres and under, no.
Is that for both residential and non-residential?
I
Yeah.
would think we need to do it
Okay.
for both, is that?
That's fine with me.
Okay.
Okay.
What I'm trying to come up with is something that allows someone that just wants to have a little bitty hobby farm and maybe 1 or 2 acres and wants to keep 1 or 2 animals in a small barn or whatever, but then also not have somebody take a small piece of property and try to maximize, and have a lighted arena and all that. So I think this is kind of working that way.
Shall I continue?
Sure.
Now we're into covered riding areas, and this is just a covered riding area with no lighting or bleachers, just a plain covered riding area. The Planning Commission recommended that in residential use parcels to prohibit it. The staff recommended in residential areas to allow with a special use permit. For non-residential, the Planning Commission prohibited. For non-residential, the staff recommended allowed with a use permit, no minimum acreage. So Planning Commission again prohibited both residential and non-residential. Staff allowed it for both residential and non-residential with a special use permit.
Bill?
Are we using this summary sheet? Doesn't seem to.
It doesn't have staff.
It doesn't have staff.
It doesn't have the staff on it. Karen asked.
I asked
You
for
got the
staff's
current.
recommendations
That's
too.
why.
Oh, your staff.
The idea was that we wanted to work off the Planning Commission, but
Right.
I'm happy to provide what the staff provided.
Again, first up, make sure everybody's picturing the same thing with the rider. I think I know which barn Councilmember Thurman's talking about with the covered riding area, and that's very appropriate and nice
Very
looking.
pretty barn.
Again, I've seen a lot of tasteful, smaller riding areas, covered riding areas, and on smaller property. I just want to make sure everybody's thinking the same thing, because there's pretty ones and ugly ones and anything in between. So I think when we talked before, we could have the covered riding areas with some kind of permit where they'd have to go through DRB in that process, to where, we could have some minimum, some standards there where they couldn't put up a junky rusted metal, something that they moved from somewhere else. If that would help too. But I'll open it up and see what, you got some ideas on the covered riding areas? I'm almost picturing covered riding areas smaller than uncovered, because that's a massive structure. You wouldn't have near as many applicants for a covered riding area as an uncovered riding area.
As far as applicants, yeah.
And don't forget, this is where the under 4 acres kicks in, where you have to, your max is 20,000 foot structure. And if it's over 4 acres, you're maxed out at 25,000 feet.
That's a big structure, 24 acres.
Yeah.
I mean, for consistency, it seems like if we just, prohibited for them under 5 acres in the front yard, but then allowed them above 5 acres with a use permit, that would be consistent with what.
But I'd like to add some more restrictions on this if we, like I say, having to go through part of the use permit
Well,
as
the use
DRB.
permit, they would
and-
have to get through if it's a
Make
structure,
sure
they have to go through the DRB.
Yeah, that would be inherent
It would
in
already
the
be-
review
okay.
process.
Because I think that's important. We don't want them, we want to have some say-so on what the structure looks like,
Right.
especially if it's in the front yard.
Let's go into the use permit process, open up the public comment as well. I mean, 'cause it's a
Yes.
public hearing process as
Oh,
well.
absolutely. And it also
So-
goes to the planning commission, is that
Right,
correct,
the
Robin?
planning commission
Yes.
touches it.
Right.
Okay. Want to recommend something?
Oh, well,
What you're hearing here? You wanna- you-
I think that what you recommended so far, with, with the uncovered, which the minimum of 5 acres, and anything over 5 acres has to get a use permit, so that you're not allowing it under 5 acres, and anything over gets a use permit.
Yeah.
Might be a
Yeah,
good
I
route to
think
go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, Mayor, I'm okay with that. I'm getting a little bit confused because the whole idea behind us updating this was to provide more flexibility for our citizens. I think the background on this ordinance in particular said we had a lot of residents who had to apply for some kind of a variance because they couldn't put the structures in that they wanted. And in looking at this, for the most part, other than for animal barns, we were getting more restrictive, not more flexible. So I'm a little concerned that somehow we missed something. So I hate to sound like a broken record, but I'm for putting in some mechanism that allows residents to gain access to what they want to do. If that's through a special permit or whatever, I think it's a good idea. But just blanket saying it just can't be done, I think we're closing our eyes to what the original intent of this was.
I see that point. The only thing I would say, I think we are moving in that direction with the barns and the uncovered riding rings. We're allowing that in much smaller areas. When you get to a covered riding area, that's usually a pretty serious facility. And, somebody's going to have more than 5 acres or 10 acres or, whatever. So I don't know that we're really
Yeah, and I'm at a
people real bad.
disadvantage because I grew up on a quarter of an acre. So, that's.
I'm just saying, as we're working down the
my
line,
challenge.
we're getting into more serious uses.
Right.
And I think it's reasonable to say that, we're not, if somebody, I doubt very seriously we'd have somebody, come in on 2 or 3 acres that wants to
Right,
put a
and
covered riding
then it
area.
becomes obvious,
Well, and then it's not in keeping with the intent of the zoning code,
Right,
so we
right.
deny it, so it's.
So I guess hearing that, hearing the council, would you recommend going with the same?
I would, because you're getting into more intense uses, and if you've done it for the less intense ones, I would think you'd want to be as consistent, if not even more
Right.
prohibitive.
I mean, we could do 5 acres also, or we could bump it up if council wanted to. Am I hearing yes for 5 acres or with a use permit?
I think
I
5.
think 5 with use permit's fine,
Be
because,
fine.
it may be 5
And it kind
acres
of
where
sets the ground rules right up front for anyone that's purchasing a piece of property. At least they know what the
It's easy.
rules are going in and what you're going to have to go through in order to do what you want to with the property.
Okay.
5 and above or 5 or below? You want-
5 and-
prohibited below 5, 5 and above, it has to have a use permit, is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. They're allowing on 5 and above with a use permit.
Yeah. And then the very last one is the most intensive. It's the covered riding area with lighting and/or bleachers. And the planning commission did recommend that both residential and non-residential be prohibited. And again, the staff recommended that both of those be allowed with a use permit, the residential and non-residential, with no minimum acreage involved at all.
And again, when you get, lighting could be a big issue, or it wouldn't necessarily have to be. And bleachers, I think you need to, it's one thing, I've seen a lot of small riding rings where you got, quote, bleachers, but it's just, 4 steps up and, 6 people could sit on it or whatever, versus a full set of bleachers that could house 50 people or 100 people.
And it's the loudspeakers that you could end up with the bleachers as well. that
Right.
Could create a noxious use.
But as we ratchet, I would be comfortable ratcheting it up some, because that's a pretty serious,
Would you say 10 acres with not prohibited and under 10 acres, above 10 acres allowed with a use permit?
I'd feel comfortable with that, but that's a pretty serious gig there. Everybody all right with that?
actually go along with that as well. I mean, with what we're looking at, the use of a covered riding arena with the lighting, with the bleachers, is going to be involving a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people go into that, not just for a one-time deal. You're talking about, on indoor shows and things like that. I actually like, as it is, what they say, but I'll go along with what Karen said for having it with the use permit of 10 acres as well. But we are talking about a big operation. We just need to be aware of that in that situation, which is good. I mean, we need to allow people to know that they want to do that in Milton, but we got to make sure that, we don't go overboard as well in that situation. You can't go overboard.
Lance?
And, I think the 10 acres is appropriate. Again, still going to a use permit process. That way, during that process, you can set hours of operation, those types of,
Right, which is a very important issue.
that will be a very important issue.
Yes.
Especially in a
If it's near a
residential.
residential area.
Have we defined what lighting actually means? I mean, does it mean one light bulb out front, or does it mean, actually the whole area, riding area being lit? So I think we need to make sure that, if you have one little light bulb out front, it's not considered lighting, but yet the whole area being lit with floodlights, I think is what the intent is here. So,
Yeah, so we really need to define lighted, what that means in
Right.
terms of the, whatever the measurement is, it's lumens, is it not?
Or foot candles,
Foot
lumens.
candles, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, you probably need to have some criteria where, you could consider unlighted if it just has a couple of light, residential type light fixtures with a bulb, just so that,
Right.
you can see to get out of there when it's dark,
Public
versus
safety.
actually lighting it up like an indoor stadium.
Yeah.
Has some
Yeah,
criteria
I
there.
guess maybe it'd be like arena lighting
Yeah.
would be kind of the definition of what you'd be doing.
Okay, well, we'll bring some definitions back and
Okay.
whatever, so you can review it.
Okay.
I do have one question. This is just a general question. Did anybody discuss what the ordinances were, or look at them with what they were with regards to our neighbors in the north up in Canton, Cherokee County? Are these in line with that, or do we know? And I just asked from an economic attraction deal, where do people want to actually take their horse properties and things like that? I just didn't know. It's just a question.
And Robin, can you respond?
Just throughout the years, I've done a lot of research on the agricultural uses, and really most of the communities in the area, Cherokee or Forsyth, they really don't address the specific criteria. Actually, there's only a few counties who even have AG1 left. Most of the information I get is from other jurisdictions out of state, whether it's Aiken, South Carolina, or Lexington, Kentucky, or Calabasas, California. I mean,
So all the
really,
primary equestrian places have a jurisdiction.
right?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's really not a lot to go by. Even really, there's a lot of jurisdictions that don't even have AG1 districts left. So.
Okay. Does that give you, staff, some, you can work on some criteria?
Yes, the
but,
criteria, absolutely.
Maybe, Robin, do you mind repeating what we've?
I was going to ask you guys to make sure that we understood exactly, because I'd be writing and then you guys would be talking. So if
Okay, we can go, we can go back through and, let's, talk about, livestock
so I got that.
allowed in barns in front of house. On residential is allowed. And on non-residential, I think we're allowing that also with no minimum.
I have a question. The way it's written, even with this planning commission's recommendation, I don't really see where it talks about residential versus non-residential. We're talking about the position that it is. For instance, the planning commission had recommended that the horses be located in the rear side yards, and then 4B talks about structures housing livestock may be located in the front yard. So there's nothing that defines whether it has a residential or non-residential. Actually, it used to be defined at the old Ford, and you can see that. But in this version, we don't really talk about that, if that makes sense. So,
Well, I just assume if we're talking about allowing barns front of a structure, you know, it would,
right, and then if it was just a barn,
they would
it's
have
gonna
access to everything.
If it's just a barn without any other structure, it's
Correct.
still gonna have to be within the confines of
The
the
setbacks.
setbacks.
Correct.
So, okay. Okay, so like 4A would be structures housing domesticated or livestock, which may be located in the rear or side yards. But you all want them anywhere. You want them in the front yard too, correct?
Well, that's B, is the front yard,
That's
right?
B.
Right, I know, but they
Yes.
separated it because the original recommendation. So you want them anywhere, front, rear, or side, so long as they meet the setbacks, correct?
Yes,
Yes.
I would assume.
Okay,
I think that's what we,
okay. So we can create, the 4B would be structures housing livestock which may be located in the front, side, and rear yards, provided that the structure must be located at least 100 feet from all property lines and at least 150 feet from any occupied structure located on any other property. And parcels with less than 5 acres will require a use permit?
Yes.
I don't think that was
Or
on, no,
we
we're
know.
just, I'm just talking about,
Not on that.
not on that one.
So they can just do it no matter what?
Now, we said, the first one, we did say that it require a use permit for less than
I
5
thought you said
acres.
them on
Right.
the first three of these.
Yep,
Right.
that's what we had written down.
Okay.
But I think one of the things Robin's trying to clarify, because we switched up mid-debate as the debate progressed, what I originally heard was on a lot of these special use permits we were talking about was 0 up to 5 acres is where you wanted the special use permit to have to be in play. 5 and above, no special use permit. The notion being that they've got, I guess, a big enough piece of property.
That was for the
You know,
first two, and then we
That's
then we
what I wanted to
switched.
distinguish. That's what I wanted to
Yes.
distinguish.
We
Right.
switched after that.
And I was under the impression, we talked about on the actual, you know, and if we use the cheat sheet on the barns in front of a house, of a residential, as well as a non-residential, that we didn't have a minimum, or did we say 5 acres? As I
We
was
said
thinking.
a non-residential, a minimum of less than 5 acres, then it required a use permit. Above 5 acres, it did not
Okay,
require a
so we're
use
still
permit.
allowing it in the smaller areas.
For non-residential, just for non-residential?
Just for
And for
non-residential.
residential, we said it was allowed anytime.
Okay.
Well, that's challenging then, to the
Yes,
extent you
it's
just
totally
combined them.
Yeah.
Right, okay, so,
And it was the same thing, I think, for the uncovered riding areas.
Right.
Yeah,
okay,
we were
let's get the
saying,
first one. Let me-
1 and 2, I think, were the same. Then we switched it on up.
So this is structures, housing with, without residential structure, residential use. Use, okay. So structures housing livestock without a residential use, which may be located in the front, side, and rear yards, provided the structure must be located at least 100 feet, blah, 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 and then 150 feet from blah, blah, blah. And for any parcels less than 5 acres will require a use permit for
Yes.
non-resident.
For non-residential.
That's already,
Non-residential,
that's
yes.
captured.
Right, without a residential use, okay. But for residential uses, you would want the same thing, but with no use permit. It would just say structures, housing, livestock
Are allowed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
are allowed.
it's just going to
Okay.
allow it, yeah.
Okay. Well, we still need to put the setbacks, yeah.
Yeah, it definitely still had the setbacks in there.
Okay, so this would be the same. Residential,
Okay.
okay, okay. We got that.
okay,
Next one, I think, was uncovered riding areas was the same. Allowed into residential and allowed in non-residential above 5 acres, allowed in residential below 5 acres with a use permit.
Right.
yep.
Basically the mirror of what we just went through. is
Yes.
what it seemed
So
like.
same thing, just change the wording from livestock barns to uncovered riding areas.
And that's with no lighting.
Correct.
That's correct. And then the next
Uncovered,
three.
unlit, unbleachered.
Yeah.
Is that a word?
And then the next two, for residential and non-residential, it was allowed with a use permit over 5 acres. Is that how we,
Yes.
Yes.
Residential was a use permit. Did we put the acreage on it?
Did we put 5, right?
Okay.
Less than 5 needs a,
I think we allow them on 5 acres and then with a use permit,
for residential
5 acres.
5 acre
covered
minimum.
or
Well,
uncovered.
I think
it was for both the next two.
uncovered riding with the lighting and bleachers as well as a covered riding
Without.
without. We kept the same, from what I recall.
right?
And then when we got to the covered riding areas with bleachers and lighting, we went up to 10 acres.
Should we go to 8 acres to that, since that's consistent with the conservation?
We could, I don't know that the two
It
go
doesn't ma-
hand in
yeah,
hand.
it really doesn't matter, I
really.
guess.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so where are you on your?
Okay, so uncovered riding areas for residential, when there's a house on it with a residential structure, you're asking for a use permit for more than 5 acres.
Right. Minimum of 5 acres and a use permit. Everybody?
And that's for both residential and
Yeah,
non-residential.
then we did it for both.
And to be clear, less than 5 acres, it's prohibited.
Prohibited.
So you can't have an uncovered riding area.
It's lit and bleachers.
Oh, it's lit.
That's
Right.
what.
Right.
The uncovered, the plain uncovered goes with the barns, the same restrictions as
Yeah.
the barns.
Okay, then we moved to the covered riding areas
Okay.
with lighting and bleachers. We set a minimum of 10 acres and a use permit required.
Can you say that again? Covered,
The covered with lighting and bleachers.
And/or.
And/or bleachers. Minimum of 10 acre and requires a use permit.
so it would be prohibited under 10 acres within.
Right.
Correct.
Yes.
Because we felt like that was a pretty high intense use. Okay. Have any more? We can recap that in
Yeah,
motion.
Well, here's the question. Does the council want to recap that in a motion this evening, or does the council want to defer this to let staff go put it all together? Because what you've had tonight is 3 different versions running in parallel. So, I mean, I'm just offering that to you from the standpoint of trying to get something that you can understand as well when you see it in front of you. But I'll leave that to you. I'm not advocating that. I'm just asking.
Karen?
It would, if we defer it, because I think that's maybe a good idea to have one clean thing that we're actually proving, but it would have to be deferred until the next zoning agenda, correct? So it would be deferred until,
March 19th.
Well, you've had your public hearing. I don't know that it would need to.
could we go ahead and have it at the first, because I.
Yes, ma'am.
Next
And do we
meeting?
have any,
It's just practice, we have zonings on the
Right.
3rd Monday. There's
do
no-
we have any permits or anything before us that this would affect? Seems like it might be better to wait till we had something clean that we're actually.
I agree. Yeah.
Just some for your purposes of your record, too.
All right.
This
No, I
is-
agree.
Let's make a clean record.
I have a motion that we defer this item, but that staff, I believe staff has got enough information to come back with a clean, clear-cut copy of what we've
Absolutely.
discussed.
Before we do that.
Matt?
And I'm just trying to think of the work session as well, and we talked about the livestock issue. Didn't we also mention something about, because horses was still prioritized by the planning commission, but didn't we mention something as well as about other animals requiring a use permit. I'm just trying to, for some reason I was recalling that, and I don't remember exactly, but that was just a thought. Only because I remember mentioning that some horses require having a goat, but they didn't want all animals there. Did we want to talk about that?
Well, they had said horses only,
You've captured
We take
something much
but we
broader.
captured
Yeah.
livestock.
Do we want to do that, is the question.
Do you, do we discriminate? You know, what's the cow gonna say, or the goat,
For the
or the
camel.
llama?
That's some pretty, I mean, it's tough line drawing, it is,
Yeah.
because you're going to have a facility for housing barn, or for horses, and you may get some nefarious other animals that slip in there, and then you've got a citation offense. But
Well, we have some pretty sheep right on Providence Road too, and I would hate to discriminate against them and their big bright red bows they wear at Christmas time.
But Councilman Coons is correct, I know the Planning Commission did limit it quite succinctly.
I personally feel like we don't need, livestock now. I can't really think of someone's building a barn that's going to change them from, if they've got a AG1 property and they're allowed hogs or whatever, I don't necessarily think that's going to, precipitate them to build a barn and then have, an animal that people don't want. I think if, because this is all talking about putting a structure in a barn, I think if you're going to put a barn, it's going to, just practicality is going to limit it to horses, cows, maybe sheep, maybe, llama or something like that we already see around. But
Are we defining livestock in this as well?
can you define livestock? Yeah,
It is.
Is there a way to define it?
It is defined in the animal section.
Okay.
So livestock means horses, mules, cows, sheep, goats, hogs, and all other animals used or suitable for either food or labor. You hear the hogs and all that, but there's actually larger setbacks for hogs. It's like 300 feet.
Okay.
So there's other regulations for
Okay,
some of
so
them.
that'll help kind of keep that, because we're actually really just talking, we're not so much talking about what kind of animals.
Right.
Because if people didn't put a barn,
Have animals, right.
any kind of animals are within the existing ordinance, so I think we're okay with the livestock definition, as long as it's defined there.
Mayor, writing,
Lance?
I don't want to belabor this, but can you can we just get a quick recap of everything so we know are we straight on everything we just?
Well, I think that's why we're deferring it, we're
Yeah.
talking about deferring it, so that we'll have it on paper,
Okay.
and everybody can,
Okay.
that'd be the best thing, don't you think?
Okay.
Kathy? Okay. And so I will open it up for a motion.
Go ahead, Karen.
Councilmember Longoria.
I'll let
I heard
Karen
you
go.
first.
Okay.
She can second that.
Mayor, I move that we defer zoning agenda RZ 12-01, agenda item 12-033 until
What would the date?
staff can provide
If we
an
do it-
updated version of this document.
If we do it March 5th, that means the item has to be prepared and ready to publish Monday, February 27th. So that's a very loose, tight leash, that we can go to March 19th.
Yeah, so
That's fine.
so we can
I was
just,
about to say, if nothing's in the hopper.
Nothing's in the hopper, then it's
So
okay.
just, you would say March 19th?
yeah,
First
until
one,
March 19th. I'd said until they had an opportunity to get ready, but we can say March 19th.
Okay.
I'll
so-
second it.
All right, got a motion by Councilmember Longoria, second from Councilmember Thurman to defer this item RZ 12-01 to March 19th, the meeting of March 19th.
Thank you.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Okay. Our city clerk, please say on the next zoning item.
Next item is RZ 1117, to amend Article 16 of the zoning ordinance, Chapter 64 of the City Code, signs. Agenda item number 12012. First presentation at the February 6th regular council meeting, discussed at February 13th work session. Ms. Kathy Field.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as the city clerk mentioned, we did discuss this at the work session of February 13th, and we did capture several items that were discussed, and let me just give you an overview of them, and then I'll direct you into the document itself. You'll have a new document dated February 16th, And essentially, this document has cleaned up all the comments to date, but does highlight the discussion items from the work session. So that's sort of where we are. And they're highlighted. There are no case recommended. They were just highlighted for purposes of your discussion this evening. And the first item that we talked about at the work session was flags within the entire city in terms of the size and number of the flags permitted. So we did go back and look at that, and we did increase the number of flags from 1 per development to 3 flagpoles, not to exceed the district height of each flagpole. And each flagpole would be allowed 1 flag. The length of the flag shall not exceed 1/4 the length of the flagpole. Single-family residential lots would be permitted to have 1 flagpole not to exceed 25 feet in height, and 1 flag measured in the same manner as flags in development. That means the length of the flag to the flagpole. We also looked at the idea of a grand opening event signage, and then this would be across the entire city. And staff has included the allowance of a special event permit that regulates this type of event. We propose that the event shall last only for 48 hours, and to allow the following: 1 banner, 1 4-square-foot temporary sign, 1 temporary tent, 1 inflatable device, 1 searchlight, and a temporary outside display of merchandise. And then within all the overlay districts, we put in clarifying language regarding the area of doors and the spandrel glass panels, and we propose that we clearly now show that they should be excluded from the calculation of the applicable sign area for the applicable elevation. Within all overlay districts, we cleaned up the language in terms of no window signs to be allowed in clerestory windows, and that in no case shall window signs exceed 10% of the total area per elevation. And that was in response, Councilwoman Thurman, to your concern about a facade being 100% glass. And so if we're going to allow 20% coverage in a window, and we're going to estimate that to be 50%, if the windows were 100% of the building, we said that in no case should it be 10% more. So you still get that same percentage of coverage. Okay, that's where that came from. And then within the Crabapple and Birmingham overlay districts, businesses whose primary entrance space is an interior parking lot or courtyard may have an additional wall sign, and the sign shall not exceed 3% of the applicable wall area. And that was to respond to Councilman Luss' concern. So now if you'll go, and we have numbered the lines, so this should be a little easier tonight, and thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman Grant, for that suggestion. I'm on page 14, and I'm on line 688. And this essentially shows you how we change the language for flags. And this same language appears in all the districts all the way through. So let me just read one to you, and you'll know that this carries through. It reads as follows: each development may display no more than 3 flagpoles. And in addition, each single-family detached residential lot within each development may display not more than 1 flag and flagpole. Each flagpole is allowed 1 flag. In non-residential districts, the flagpole shall not exceed the maximum allowed building height. In residential districts, the maximum height of the flagpole should be 25 feet. The length of the flag shall not exceed 1/4 the length of the flagpole. The size of the flag shall be calculated accordingly. So that is the flag language that we inserted, and to respond to, again, to the discussion that came up at the last work
Karen
session.
and Bill?
Yeah, what about if you've got a flag that's like attached to your, it's not on a flagpole, but it's attached to your home? How are those calculated in here? Because there's no longer a square footage, and you really don't have a flagpole. How are you calculating?
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, we have one in our house. I
Yeah.
know what you're saying.
I've just bought a new one, put up this weekend.
Angela, would you like to respond to that, please?
We basically don't have any prohibitions or anything else against that. I mean, you can just do it.
It doesn't count against the pole,
Yeah,
the
no,
Okay.
no.
flagpole.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions on flags?
Yeah, that was my question, too. I have 3 flags on my house.
You're good. Good man.
I'm now going to move on
Code enforcement?
to
Got my U.S. flag.
page 17, and I'm on line 864. And this speaks to the grand opening event signage. And so let me just read this one, but again, this appears in the OI district, the mixed-use district, the commercial industrial park districts, okay? And it says as follows: for grand opening event signage. Signs for grand opening events are permitted for any new or relocated business according to the following standards. The grand opening event is allowed within 2 months of the issuance of the certificate of occupancy. A special event permit must be obtained from the Community Development Department prior to conducting the grand opening event. The special event permit for a grand opening is valid for a period of 48 hours. 2, under signage. 1 banner shall be allowed for a grand opening event, but shall not exceed 24 square feet in area. A separate permit is required for this banner. Also allowed is 1 4 square foot temporary sign is also allowed. Section 3, a temporary tent may be used in conjunction with a grand opening special event permit. The fire marshal's sign-off must be obtained on the special event permit for the use of the tent. 4, 1 inflatable device is allowed within the event footprint with a maximum size of 2,000 cubic feet and a maximum height of 20 feet. The vendor or owner of the inflatable must indicate the method of inflation, chemicals used, sign a hold harmless agreement, and provide evidence of liability insurance. Subsection 5, 1 searchlight or similar device is allowed. The light must be diminished by 11 p.m. 6, temporary outside display of merchandise is permitted for a grand opening event. A, such display shall be located next to the building entrance door, provided a minimum of 36-inch clear and unobstructed walkway is maintained. And B, any display not brought inside of the business at close of business day is considered outdoor storage and is prohibited. So that is our sample of an outdoor event.
Well, a question on that, I guess item 6 also refers to item 1, which is for that 48-hour period. And they say temporary outside display of merchandise is permitted, I assume for that 48-hour period?
Well, that's for each day. You still have to bring it in at the end of the day.
But for a week's period, or for a month, or for how many days?
Well, any
48
day.
hours.
48 hours.
Yes.
So that's what, yes, 6 is in line with
Right.
number 1. Okay.
Right.
How did we get into, from signage to outdoor displays of merchandise? Is that considered a sign?
In this ordinance?
Angela, do you want to respond to
I mean,
that?
if outside
Yeah.
storage of merchandise is prohibited, I understand that.
I mean, you could have signage associated with the merchandise. If you have a table, for example, you're going to have some minimal signage, but I wanted to just put everything in one area for the event, and then we'll take the same verbiage and put it, with the special use. But I just wanted to make sure everything was covered in one place.
Okay.
That was also brought up at the planning commission meetings by some of the people, some of the business owners as well, just questioning that. I know why that was in there. So.
Okay, Karen?
Personally, I don't think we need inflatables, so I just don't.
It's only 48 hours.
I don't know. They just, to me, I just don't know that we really have to have inflatable devices. They just are not.
Are we talking about, are those the things that are blown up and meant to attract attention?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like a
Yes.
50-foot
Yeah.
King Kong.
Yeah, the gorillas.
Yeah.
We had a fire hydrant at one time that was as taller than any of the buildings we had in Milton.
Yeah, but then you get into does that cover the inflatables? Does that get into the inflatables if they have a special carnival or event?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, I don't
You have
know.
jumping things.
I would, and again, I don't mean to retread, y'all may have covered this at the work session, but we probably should just tread a little cautiously within the context of sign a hold harmless agreement and mandating that. I mean,
Right.
sign it for whom and in favor of whom, and even the proof of liability insurance. To whom does that have to be provided? And what are the policy limits? And again, I'm not saying any of these are bad ideas. I'm just saying y'all may want to really think about them a little bit. All of them make sense, particularly to the extent you could have combustibles used, or you could have traffic impeded, or individuals. These things fall over and hurt somebody. But we just want to, when we get too much in the weeds of getting into private contractual dealings and requiring insurance by way of a code, we need to just be careful about that.
Is your concern there, Ken, that by dipping our toe in the water, we get all wet?
my concern is when we, as the government, require as part of this grand opening event for hold harmlesses to be adopted, I guess I'm wondering, would that be between the event coordinator and the office park that it's going to be in, or the business,
Right.
or is it going to be in the name of the city of Milton? I just don't know, and I just want to call it out to you. But this is something we can
Would it
discuss.
be, if this is all regulated by a city permit, would the hold harmless and the liability be in favor of the city?
It may very well be, to the extent that we are permitting the activity, but I don't think that we would incur liability anyway by simply the issuance of a permit. We typically don't pick up liability. Goodness gracious, I hope not, because we permit a lot of activities.
Right.
Which is, and again, this is something we could debate. When I read it this afternoon getting ready for tonight, I did stop on that, and I wasn't here at the work session, so I wasn't able to speak to it.
I think your point's well taken. Any policy or coverage would be in favor of whatever development authorizes the existence.
The event, it's
the
right.
event, sure.
I mean, but
Okay, do we need
So we need to strike that?
to strike that or change that, or?
well, I mean, I'd want to hear. I'm sure that the staff had a reason that was put in there. I'd want to hear their thoughts as well, and I could certainly be dissuaded. But that stood out to me as I think someone said that's us getting pretty far into the weeds. I would want an explanation for why we need to do that. Is all.
And Angela, could you answer that, please?
I included that it was pretty standard in some of the other ordinances that I'd seen, that I'd done research on, and I think we may already have some language like that in our special use permit.
Well, okay, all right.
Special event permit or the special use?
Events.
Special
excuse me,
event permit. So
And I know
it-
it's on the sign permit,
Yeah.
like the insurance.
So who's it written in favor of?
We don't get into that kind of detail. in-
Well, you
in
say
the-
you-
Well,
Like when I review special event permits, I make sure that for instance, like the St. Patrick's Day event in Crabapple, that the business owner who's primarily responsible for the event has liability insurance for other people, not to the city, but it's just proof to show that they're doing their due diligence to make sure that they're covering their basis.
They're
So
covering
that's
their
what I look
base,
for.
not, you're protecting the citizens, it's not necessarily
Not
protecting the
policy
city, but the city shouldn't have
necessarily.
any liability just because they issued the permit.
Well, if the language is already in the special event permit, and this speaks to them getting a special event permit to put up the gorilla or whatever, maybe we can just strike the language here, and then it will just fall to the special event permit.
You okay with that, Ken?
Yeah, I am, and again, I'm not trying to be a wet blanket, and to the extent that we've got some language like that in other areas, we could, take a look at it, and I could be talked out of it. It just stood out to me, is all.
All right. Discussion for another day, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So would you like us to strike that language then from this, or you want to just leave it for now?
It sounds like it's something we may need to address on other, so leave it in there and then we'll address it across the board.
Okay, very good. I'm on page 25, and I'm down at line 13, 14. And we did clarify this so that subsection K reads as follows. Wall signs shall not exceed 100 square feet or 5% of the applicable wall area, whichever is less. The length of the sign shall not exceed 10 times the height of the sign. The area of the doors and spandrel glass panels are excluded from the calculation of the applicable sign area. So I think that makes it a little clearer what we meant from last time. So we did add that language to clean that up. And then at the very bottom there on that line 17 under subsection L, it has been rewritten to read as follows. Permanent and temporary signs and windows shall not exceed 20% of each window. No window signs are allowed in clerestory windows. In no case shall window signs exceed 10% of the, and rather than saying elevation, we would like to make the following amendment, just to read, in no case shall window signs exceed 10% of the wall area of the applicable elevation. We thought that was just a little clearer. So we cleaned up the calculations, how they're calculated, and what happens with the clerestory window, which I think was an issue from last time. Moving on, if I may, I am on page 31. Under, let's see, section 1496, we're under the crabapple overlay now. This is the additional sign issue. Single-tenant buildings and end units of multi-tenant buildings may have an additional wall sign. Businesses whose primary entrance faces an interior parking lot or courtyard may have an additional wall sign. The sign for either of these signs shall not exceed, we would like to put in the words, shall not exceed 3% of the applicable wall area. So that gets an additional sign if you're facing to the rear. And then I'd like to, let's see, on page 54, in order to accommodate the balloons and the gorillas and everything else, as well as the temporary signs and banners, all dealing with that special event opening, we had to change some of the language under prohibited signs. And so you'll see on line 1973 on page 54 that we had to add the language except where specifically allowed. And we did that under subsection 2 on line 1977 with beacons and searchlights to say except where specifically allowed. And that, of course, that specifically allowed would be that grand opening event. And then the same down on line 2009 under temporary signs and banners to attach to fences or walls except where specifically allowed. So that took it out of the prohibited and put it into specifically allowed for those grand opening events. So we had to clean that up. And then as we get to page 55, we essentially made a few cleanups in terms of citation numbers. So specifically, if you look at line 2047, you'll see where it starts off revocation of the sign permit in accordance with section. And we've changed that section number to 2230.B. So that whole paragraph, all those numbers need to be changed to 2230.B. And then on the next page, which is page 56, we did change, it's, let's see, 2089. We've changed that section from section D. The reference now reads 2332. The line 2095, again, we changed that to, rather than section D, it now reads section 2332. The same on line 2106, again, section, it now reads section 2332. And then on line 2113, the same thing, section 2132. And then the final change is on the last page. And let's see if I can find it here. Angela, do you have that last change? Because I've gotten out of sync here. Oh, here it is. All right. And on the very last page, on line 2120, we have changed the section number to 2330F. And that cleans that up. And that are all accounts for all the changes that we did as a result of the work session, the last work session.
Good. Bill?
You spoke offline before the meeting about seasonal agricultural signs.
Yes,
Did we have a discussion on that? Have you pulled up the Fulton County?
Robin has done that.
And I
You
just
can have
took
that.
it from Robin.
All right, good.
To
Excellent.
read it. It is in the Fulton Code. Apparently, this is in a former version of the Fulton Code that has now been repealed. Provides, the heading is called Seasonal Agricultural Signs, which are defined as temporary directional signs for agricultural products grown and are sold in the AG1 district or at institutions provided such signs are posted no earlier than the commencement of selling activity and are removed within 7 days of the end of the selling season. The biggest issue I see with that, to the extent that we would want to replicate it, was that is not a content-neutral verbiage. Temporary directional signs for agricultural products grown. To the extent that that is the government attempting to tell you what the message has to be on the sign, that's a problem. But you could get around it. The way you would do it would simply say some sort of an expression sign in agricultural. And it would simply allow the same sort of thing, except we just omit any reference to what message has to be on the sign. Now, everybody knows what will be on the sign. It'll be selling their products or their wares. But you just have to you have to be very cautious about putting in what the sign has to say on it. That's all. We could emulate that if you'd like to.
Because at this point, it's not allowed in our ordinance or bag.
Well, nothing specifically like that. We do, however, allow the 3 4-square-foot signs on every residential lot that can be used for whatever.
Well, this would actually be though for if you had a sign that wasn't on your own property, correct? Or is it for a sign that's on your own property, the agricultural, non-agricultural sign?
Let me see, I'm ready. It says such signs shall not exceed 16 square feet in area and shall be located only on private property with the owner's permission, which suggests to me that it can be off of property you own and could be done by way of a private agreement.
And what size is that?
16 square feet in area.
Okay.
4x4.
Okay. You guys okay with that?
Can we incorporate it?
Well, I think it's in there, right?
No, that was in Fulton County.
In Fulton County?
Yeah, and I hate to bring up something we talked about last time, but we talked about churches with special events and things like that, and for the life of me, I can't remember where we wound up with that, because we had specific issues with some of the churches in the city where they weren't allowed signage to advertise things like fall festivals and stuff like that. Did we get around that by providing permits for that, or is there?
Well, I didn't add anything specifically for that. I don't think the issue. We've never told them they couldn't have signage. I think the type of signs that they typically think of were in the right of way. You know, the ones you see at the corner or along the side of the road, and I mean those are pretty much across the board prohibited. And again, you still have those 3 4-square-foot signs per lot.
And also banners.
And a banner.
Okay, all right. That's the answer I was looking for. Thank you.
Okay, so we're back to really just the one on the agricultural or
Content neutral expression signs.
Or Christmas
What do we
tree and
call
honey.
them?
Christmas
It's
trees and honey.
complicated.
Yeah.
Christmas tree, farmer's market, and honey.
PC sign.
Was there an interest in, this talks about limiting their duration to the selling season. Well, once again, that's focusing right back on that the sign is going to be necessarily linked to the product that is sold. I think we talked before the meeting, maybe about 30 days, and with a permit. Is that what you all have in mind, or something less or more? Or?
I don't remember that specific conversation, but yeah, 30 days sounds like a good idea to me.
I think they can cover most growing seasons or selling seasons.
Okay, so are you wording that so that if someone wants to add that to their motion, we could insert that? Okay, is there any other questions for Kathy or comments?
I would say there was a lot of work put in this by the planning commission and
Yeah.
staff. I came really after it was all drafted, so
I'm,
I really want to give the credit where the credit's due.
I want to thank everybody for all the hard work and planning commission and staff because, this is something that we needed to do and over the last 5 years have learned some things that needed to be adjusted. And so I think they've taken in most of those in consideration. And I think, it says a lot when we had business owners come up and thank us for, they looked through this and they feel confident with it. So, and we haven't, I don't believe we've had any negative comments from citizens or whatever either. So,
No, I truly think the planning commission tried to address all the issues that were
I think
brought before it.
went right, hit it in the middle. So, that being said, is anybody want to make a motion and add what Ken?
Trying to figure out what to say.
And add what Ken's wording's going to be?
How do you capture all of that?
Well, I think if you could,
So it's advertising and it's not in
Make-
it could be under all districts permitted, right?
Well, the way I have this framed right now, based upon the feedback, is we would call this seasonal expression signs in agricultural zoning districts, which would be a temporary expression sign in agricultural zoning districts shall be allowed for 30 days and shall require a sign permit. Such signs shall not exceed 16 square feet in area and should be located only on private property with the owner's permission and shall be located out of the right-of-way.
That's probably a good start. We can always adjust it if we find it needs to be, but I think that at least gets us.
all right, is that something that we can have a motion to approve?
I had a question, if I can, before you do that. Now, is that the sign is only allowed on AG1 property, or can
Yes.
someone in a CUP put up a sign for the farm down the road?
No, only, the
Only in
signage should
AG1.
only be in AG1.
That may limit, that's a limit a lot.
Well, that's
Right
what I'm
there.
saying. Do you want it allowed in all districts so that they can advertise on Highway 9 for their Christmas tree farm down? in the
For their
AG1
farmer's market.
Or the farmer's market?
Well, then you would just call it seasonal expression signs in all zoning districts. But again, at that point, you are cutting the tether of even having any remote possibility to be linked to agricultural. So it could be anything they want to say on it could be on there, which that's the First Amendment.
Not anything.
Yeah. I was just-
Not
Subject
anything.
to a battery of case law, yes, you're correct about
Well,
definition of
you got to think, is somebody going to, what a worst case scenario, is somebody going to advertise some goods that they have on Highway 9 and, I don't know, they have to grow, if it's agriculture, you have to grow it or whatever, it's going to be,
It's got to be
Yeah.
legal now.
yeah.
I'd recommend, just because this is sort of a new thing we're grappling, that we limit it at first, maybe see if there's a utility for it, if it's needed, and then maybe come back, and if it needs to be expanded, maybe you could do that.
At least this.
So then, as you originally read,
Right.
Okay, well then if we want to, a motion could be made to approve this ordinance with staff's recommendations and then allow Ken
Then
to
I'll
read
read
that
that.
into the motion.
Yeah.
Do I have a motion? Councilwoman Thurman?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we approve RZ 11-17 to amend Article XVI of the zoning ordinance, Chapter 64 of the City Code signs, agenda number 12-012. Yes, I know it's 16. Based on staff recommendations and with the addition of the wordage,
Verbiage for a seasonal expression sign in agricultural zoning districts, which shall mean a temporary expression sign in agricultural zoning districts shall be allowed for 30 days and shall require a sign permit. Such signs shall not exceed 16 square feet in area and shall be located only on private property with the owner's permission and shall be located out of the right-of-way.
second.
Okay, I have a motion by Councilwoman Thurman, second by Councilmember Longoria. for approval with the addition of read into the record by city attorney. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That's unanimous. We'll move on to new business.
Text message that said, "Come on down." We'll be happy to know the Charter Commission is still meeting, so we'll have to both ends of the building.
Okay. Under first item in new business.
First item is approval of a resolution imposing a limited and temporary moratorium upon issuance of business licenses to new pain management clinics within the city of Milton. Agenda item number 12049. Mr. Ken Gerard.
Mr. Mayor and members of the council, this is a matter we visited before. We visited a work session, and in fact, we've got a moratorium currently in place. This pertains to so-called pain management clinics or pill mills. They have gotten quite a bit of attention from the Attorney General and the State General Assembly that has adopted some legislation attempting to combat what is perceived to be a real and growing problem with respect to the abuse of prescription medications. This is something that's not only being looked at locally and including statewide and regionally and even nationally. The City of Milton in May of 2011 adopted a resolution imposing a moratorium on the issuance of business license for pain management clinics until April 30th of 2012. You did that for a couple of reasons, one of which was to monitor what the General Assembly did at the 2011-2012 legislative session with respect to these clinics and to see if they, in fact, adopted some meaningful legislation. I will say that the result is a mixed bag. There was, in fact, some meaningful legislation that was adopted. Primarily, there was a fairly ambitious centralized database program that was adopted that will allow, once it is in place, for the state of Georgia to do some comprehensive monitoring of prescription medications. No doubt they will, quite frankly, tag by way of software perhaps certain of the controlled substance medications that are, quite frankly, issued or authorized too frequently to have a legitimate or bona fide medical need associated with them. However, our review has indicated that it's going to be some time before that database is up and running, and therefore some time before there could be any meaningful relief. And of course, I think that the city manager's concern is he would want to get ahead of this issue as opposed to reacting to it. Based upon that and based upon the further need to both monitor this and work with planning staff to come up with some regulations in the zoning code that will thwart the introduction of this sort of business into the city of Milton, I am proposing to you another moratorium to commence immediately and run until August 8th, 2012. It will mimic the language, excuse me, not 2012, that would be a very, yes, 2012, and it would mimic the language of the moratorium that is in place right now. This will allow, again, me to work with planning staff to come up with potential zoning regulations to address this issue, and also will allow us to further monitor what the state of Georgia is doing. Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Do you have any questions on this? I know we new guys here, we talked a little bit about it. But, okay. If I don't have any discussion, I'll open up for a motion. Councilmember Longoria.
Mayor, I move we approve a resolution imposing a limited and temporary moratorium upon issuance of business licenses to new pain management clinics within the city of Milton. Agenda item number 12-049.
Second.
Okay. I have a motion by Councilmember Longoria, second by Councilmember Kuntz. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimous. City Clerk, please sound the next item.
Next item is approval of a resolution supporting modification to the City of Milton Public Buildings and Facilities Authority Act. Agenda item number 12050. Mr. Chris Lagerfeld.
Mayor and Council, this one should be pretty straightforward. We've had this discussion. I think I've had it with each of you individually as to some of the different ways that we could go about restructuring our lease in the City Hall facility, at least on the short term. And one of those ways would be through our Public Facilities Authority that was created by the General Assembly in 2007. I guess it was signed by the governor. We have a different Public Facilities Authority than one that has been used for this purpose in Sandy Springs, for example, as they've negotiated a lease structure for their City Hall. One of the options that they have there, which makes this operate fairly straightforward and is regularly accepted, is for the mayor and council on occasion to be able to allow to appoint themselves to this Public Facilities Authority. Representative Jones has introduced local legislation to change our Public Facilities Authority and asked that I just bring something forward to the council so that she would have something indicating you all, number one, knew about it, number two, supported her making that change. That's what this document does. And if you approve it tonight, it'll be transmitted to her tomorrow.
Okay, any questions on this? Okay, all in favor, please say aye. Oh, no, we need a motion.
Mr. Mayor, before you do that, real quick, I want to note that the one that published in the packet had its adoption in it twice in Section 5. It would be cleared up and reflected as only adoption reading once in the document that went to Representative Jones.
Okay, do I have a motion?
I'll do it, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to make a motion that we approve of a resolution supporting modification to the City of Milton Public Buildings and Facilities Authority Act, agenda item number 12-050.
Second motion.
Okay, got a motion by Councilmember Kuntz, second by Councilmember Lusk. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. Okay, will the city clerk please sound the next item?
Our next item is approval for correction on listing of positions document presented in FY 2012 budget. This is agenda item number 12051. Ms. Deb Harrell.
Good evening. This is in the budget that was approved. There was a position listing chart created by HR, and it inadvertently listed 5 sergeants' positions and 4 lieutenants instead of 4 sergeants and 5 lieutenants. And I just wanted to get that corrected because I do want to maintain a lieutenant in CID as it kind of is concurrent with what I have running UPD shifts. So it's really just fixing a typo. The dollar amounts were correct. Personnel's not changing. There is currently a sergeant in that lieutenant box, and I would like to get that to a lieutenant. That's why I wanted to make sure that this typo was fixed. I didn't want there to be any question later. So as Chris says, in an abundance of caution, we just wanted to bring it to your attention and make sure that it was approved.
Okay, any questions? No questions? Councilwoman Thurman?
I'll make a motion to approve a reclassification, approve for correction of listing of positions document presented in fiscal year 2012 budget, agenda item number 12-051.
Second.
Second. Councilwoman Thurman made a motion, second by Councilmember Kuntz. There's no discussion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. City Clerk, please sound the next item.
Next item is approval of reclassification of Community Outreach and Policy Coordinator to Accreditation Manager. This is agenda item number 12052. Chief Deb Harrell.
We had a civilian in an officer position, and he was handling crime prevention, community outreach, and accreditation, which the accreditation is kind of the overall term for the person who writes the policy, who keeps us in compliance with the state certification that we already have, and the person who would work on getting us the national accreditation. We're under contract to get that. We're about a year into a 3-year contract. If you remember, we got that. It was kind of a grant, but what it was they waived their fee to get us in. We were one of 5 police departments internationally that was chosen for that, so we really got to get that accomplished in the next 2 years. So that civilian left us around the same time that you were gracious enough to give me some new police officer positions in the new budget back in October. So what I would like to do, and talk to Chris, I'd like to, the position that was an officer position with a civilian in it, I'm basically splitting those job tasks into a civilian who's going to do the accreditation part and back to a uniformed police officer that's going to do the crime prevention and community relations part. So I worked with HR to make sure the class specs were right, the job description was right, and so this is, we're just asking you to approve that I'm going to have that new title over a civilian position.
Okay, Bill?
So those will both be full-time positions?
Yes.
Is that right?
And they're already essentially staffed with internal people. That was moving some internal people around and hiring a new records clerk, because the records clerk is who I want to move to the accreditation position.
Some of you might be sitting there saying, why in the world are we even talking about this at the council level? Because it seems, awfully interesting that we would be at this level of staffing of a department at the council level. I'll remind you that this is in conformance with the charter requirement that exists at this point that says that the council is responsible for creating all positions of employment within the city. So that is the abundance of caution why we're coming tonight, is because the charter vests in you all the authority to create these positions. And I didn't want to go down this road of creating things that could have been construed to have been in conflict with the charter. So you all might sit there and scratch your head like I kind of did, saying we really got to go to the council to change a 5 to a 4. I think the answer to that is yes, and I always want to have you have that ability of comfort that when we need to do these kind of things, even if they seem trivial, that in fact we've brought it forward to you.
Set the rules, you play by the rules. So.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, any questions? Okay, open up for a motion. Councilmember Longoria.
Mayor, put forth a motion ratification of an agreement. Oh gosh, I almost read the wrong thing. Approval of reclassification of community outreach and policy coordinator to accreditation manager, agenda item number 12-052.
I'll second it.
Okay, I have a motion by Councilmember Longoria, a second by Councilmember Thurman. If there's no discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous.
Thank
City
you.
Clerk, please sound the next item.
Our next item is ratification of an agreement for sale of realty between the City of Milton and Sheridan Properties Number 2, LLC, for the purchase of 3.82 acres known as Fulton County Tax Parcel Number 22-4880-0534-007-1. This is agenda item number 12053. Mr. Chris Lagerblum.
Mayor and Council, this is a ratification of an agreement that you're aware of at this point. We've been through a negotiation process. We were able to get this property, which we have affectionately called the old Hopewell School. It's contiguous and adjacent to our currently existing Belmont Park. It is 3.82 acres. It is under contract at $345,000, which is within the appraised value. This contract is contingent on a 120-day due diligence period in which we will do several assessments to include a Phase 1 environmental assessment as well as a geotech assessment, boundary survey, et cetera, the things we typically do during the due diligence process. If all that works, we will choose to close on the property within 120 days. If for some reason we have something that we find or discover in the next 120 days, we can terminate this contract for a reason or no reason at all. So at this point, this is a ratification of that agreement to allow us to move forward to the next steps in acquisition.
Okay, any questions? Karen?
Do we expect it to take 120 days to do our due diligence, or you think we'll be able to close on it quicker?
I believe we'll be able to close on it quicker.
Okay.
Carter will proceed tomorrow morning with getting the right stuff moving forward on that property. I think they want to close as quickly as we would want to close, because the quicker we close, the quicker we can make some improvements to that park. So we certainly won't take the 120 days just because we have it, but we'll probably take 60 of those at least.
Councilmember Large?
During the due diligence period, you'll be doing I guess, full title search and everything on the
Oh,
property
yeah,
as well?
absolutely.
Okay.
We'll run title. We won't close until we have title insurance.
Right.
And during that due diligence, we'll also be able to do a geological survey to make sure that we could actually move the ground to do what we want to do on that.
Yeah, that's what a geotech does. I don't think at this point we have any anticipation for structures being built on the property. We'll probably just do that geotech assessment, kind of a shotgun approach where we take borings from just an assortment of places. But yes, that would be something that make sure that we're not on top of Stone Mountain.
Sure. Right.
And that there, isn't a 55-gallon barrel underground, and that George Washington never slept there. Right. So, but yeah, we'll get to the bottom of all that.
All right. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, move to ratify an agreement for sale of realty between the City of Milton and Sheridan Properties Number 2, LLC, for the purchase of 3.82 acres known as Fulton County Tax Parcel Number 22-4880-0534-0071, agenda item number 12053.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Councilmember Luss, second by Councilmember Kuntz. Any discussion?
Just the point, during his motion, he said 2.82, which was 3.82.
Beg your pardon.
Okay, we got that in the record.
Let the record
3.82.
so reflect, yes.
Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Okay, move on to, do we have anything the council members want to report on? Okay, move on to our staff.
I don't have a whole lot tonight, other than to just recognize, I'm sorry I missed the bulk of the meeting, although I hear it was productive. Charter Commission was meeting, so I sat in on that meeting. We have a staff conference scheduled for the next 2 days. I've learned now that the correct word for anytime you get together, we'll use this at the council level. We can't call them retreats anymore. Those are apparently being attacked across the country as being these spa visits where all of a sudden people are wine and dine. So we now call them council conferences and staff conferences. So we have a conference tomorrow, and the next day for the staff. I know you got the raised eyebrows. I wouldn't believe it either. And I'll report to you tonight that we've all met individually on a host of topics. I can tell you that many of those items that we've met about are moving forward, and they have all at this point been moving forward in a positive fashion. So rather than taking them individually item by item, I'll just say that I have not moved backwards on any of the items we've talked about. If anybody has any questions or anything they'd like me to report on, I'm happy to.
Okay.
Okay. Great.
All right.
Thank you.
And, that will conclude our meeting. So if I have a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn. Second
I have
motion.
a motion and a second that we adjourn this meeting. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous.